Okay, welcome to Truth Talk special episode. I told you recently in one of my other episodes about Israel and about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that I would come back and talk about and answer the question. I've gotten two things that I'm going to kind of patch and stitch together here for a minute. The first question I got, the minute that this thing kind of got going, is people were asking me and texting me and saying, does Palestine still belong to the modern Jew? And what does the modern Jew or modern Israel have to do with the land of Palestine? Now, I said I was going to answer that, and I said I'd get back to it. And I started in on some other special episodes and didn't get back to it. And since then, I have gotten other questions concerning Palestine as a land, Palestinians as a people, and what their connection is to the Philistines or Philistinians. They have no connection. The modern day Palestinians have no connection to the ancient Philistines other than they are living in almost the exact geographical place as where the historical and ancient Philistines lived. Now, let me preface this by saying that the Philistines were an ancient people who lived in the area of what is today called Gaza, okay? And typically, and actually, their capital was the modern day cities of Ashkelon and Ashdod. Those are both there. However, the Philistinian people group as an ethnic people group has long since been extinct, okay? So, and I don't have time I'm not going to segue into a history of the Philistinian people, okay? But a long time ago, that ethnic group was made extinct. The thing that is being fought right now is not a Jew versus Philistine war. It is a Jew versus Arab war. Okay, and so I will unpack this just briefly right here for a minute. And I want to say that in this, the history behind the setting of modern Palestinians in this region is that in 1948, about 75 years ago, when after World War II, after the Holocaust, the world stage or community at that time, it was the League of Nations. It was a precursor to the United Nations. They gave the land of Israel into a two-state solution. Was the original suggestion. The Israelites, the Jews, went back into the land. Most of them went back in these little things called kibbutzes. And they were little communist communes kind of things, shared equity and shared work and shared food and benefits, but they were kibbutzes. If you want to know more about a kibbutz, I think Brother Ken Bo would be the one to ask. He actually, when he was there working in an archaeological dig, if I'm not mistaken, I think Brother Bo lived on a kibbutz. But anyhow, kibbutzim, which is the concept of the kibbutz, was to help Jews get there and get their toehold in and do this. Now, I want you to understand, this is what the world and the internet doesn't want to hear. The Western world does not want to hear what I'm about ready to say, okay? They think it is a contest of geography, okay? It is not a contest of geography. It actually has nothing to do with geography, Okay? The reason the Western world doesn't want to hear this because they don't want to admit that we are watching a religious war, a war of religion. In their mind, they think we're too advanced. They think we're too technological. They think living in post-modernity, you would never have a religious war again. By goodness, that's the stuff of the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages. But in all reality, what you are watching unfold in the world stage throughout the Middle East and the Levant, you are watching a religious war in modern times. And I know we aren't supposed to have religious wars in modern time, but lo and behold, we do. Why do I say that? Because it is religious in nature. It is religious in agenda. It is religious in objective. Okay? And so it is between the Palestinians and the Jews. Okay? Now, first of all, before I cover the Palestinian conflict, let me talk to you about the Palestinian covenant. And that is, you have to answer these questions. Is the land of Palestine still Israel's possession? And then, did the inauguration of the Mosaic or the Christian covenant, which all agree has come, did it set aside the unconditional covenant of Abraham? Okay. Now, many people go immediately to your New Testament, grab up your Bible and say, well, that covenant has passed. God broke that covenant. What they're saying is you're not living under the old covenant, and that is true in the sense that you're not living under the Mosaic covenant. Why? Well, because the Mosaic covenant was conditional. Okay. It was based on you meet this criteria and I will fulfill these promises. Okay? They obviously did not meet that criteria, and the Mosaic covenant has collapsed. It was done away with. It was replaced with a Christological concept and covenant. Okay? So I get that. We're not living under the law. The only problem is that Palestine and the Promised Land has nothing to do with the conditionality of the covenant of Moses. It has everything to do with a predated covenant to Abraham, which was not conditional. Abraham, the minute he walked out of that land, God was going to keep that promise. Okay? So you have to ask, could Israel as a people, which as an individual in Genesis 12 and Abraham, as a familial objective in the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the sons, they go from an individual in Genesis 12, they go into a familial objective of this in Genesis chapter 15, 16, and all the way through the end of the book of Genesis. They go into slavery and they go into Egypt through the leadership of Joseph. And when they come out into a national identity. Okay? So it goes individual, familial, and national. Okay? Can they hope to enter into possession of their land? Now, if you're going to answer these important questions, God stated again his covenant promise concerning Israel's possession of and inheritance in the land later on, okay? And he does so in the book of Deuteronomy, okay? And it's Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse number 1. Deuteronomy chapter 30. I'm not going to read all 10 verses, but if you would like to read it, it's Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 1 through 10. So he talks about you're going to go into the land. In verse 5, and the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it. And he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers. And the Lord thy God will circumcise thine heart and the heart of thy seed to love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, that thou mayest live. And the Lord thy God will put all these curses upon thine enemies and on them that hate thee, which persecuted thee, and thou shalt return and obey the voice of the Lord, and do all the commandments which I command thee this day. Okay? And so he tells them in verse number 9, and the Lord thy God will make thee plenteous in every work of thine hand, in the fruit of thy body, in the fruit of thy cattle, the fruit of thy land, for good. Okay? And for the Lord will again rejoice over thee for good, as he rejoiced over thy fathers. And so he goes on and he talks about it. Now, many people believe, okay, that this statement, which let's just call the Palestinian covenant, because it answers the question of Israel's relation to the land promises of the Abrahamic covenant. Now, the importance of the Palestinian covenant is, there's three main reasons. Okay, number one, it reaffirms to Israel their title deed to the land of promise. And this title deed cannot change regardless of Israel's unbelief or disobedience. Okay? Second, it shows that the conditional Mosaic covenant did not render the unconditional Abrahamic covenant null and void. Okay? The third thing that it shows, okay, that it is an elaboration of the land aspects of the Abrahamic covenant, and it reaffirms Israel's right to the land even after several acts of disobedience arising out of their unbelief. Okay? So now, here's the thing you got to understand. Their benefit, their joy, their peace, their fruitfulness in the land may be conditional by obedience. But the ownership of the land was never contested or told by God that it was going to be a conditional thing. Okay? So let's back up. Who is actually fighting right now? Well, it's not the Palestinians, and which people think are Philistinians. It's not them against modern Israel. No, it's bigger than that. It's not historical ethnic Philistinians fighting ethnic Jews. And so it's not even Islam. Don't mistake that, because Islam wasn't formed until hundreds of years after the birth and death of Jesus Christ. And I mean, you got to get all the way out into the 6th and 7th century before that thing starts metastasizing together. So what's going on here? Okay? Well, if you go to the book of Genesis, okay, Genesis chapter 16, Abraham, let's talk about it. God appears to Abraham. He's about 75 years old in Genesis 12, where God appears to him. And he's living, I don't have the time to unpack all of this part, but he's basically roughly, okay? Now, for all you that love specificity and accuracy, he's roughly living in what is today southeastern Iraq, okay? And so in southeastern Iraq, he's living in this land, Ur of Chaldee. So he's not even a Jew; he's a Chaldean, because Jew and that it's not a ethnicity, it's not a DNA, it's a faith construct. The first Hebrew wasn't even an ethnic Jew. Didn't exist. Judaism is something that is word-based faith in the God that calls you out. That's where the first Hebrew came from. And his grandson became the first man called Israel, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. So he gets called. He's 75 years old, more or less. He's roughly living in southeastern Iraq. And God leads him up. He goes north and west, and he lands in roughly what is today modern Israel. Okay? And God promises it to him and says, you see this land? Canaan, it's all yours. I promise it to you and to your children. Okay? And so the reality is that he comes into this land and he's got this wife and they're old and they can't have children. And his wife says, now, we all know Abraham's the father of the faithful. Who's Adam? Adam's the father of all living things. He names his wife Eve because she is what? The mother of all living things. So the father of all living things got himself in a world of hurt listening to his wife. And the father of the faithful got himself, he does the same thing. He gets himself in a world of hurt. By doing what? Listening to his wife. So that's for free, folks. You can do whatever you want at marriage seminars with that. But Sarah says, Abe, we're old. I'm not going to be having kids. You got this girl here, this maiden that's working for us. She's my servant. We own her. Why don't you take Hagar and basically you have a child through her, and then at least your loins have had a child. Okay? The father of the faithful does what the father of all living does. He listens to her idea and gets himself in a world of hurt. Okay? So, he takes Hagar. He sleeps with her. She gets pregnant, as Sarah said. I can't, she can. Sarah said that. But the minute it really happened, oh my goodness, Sarah was torqued. And she said, you get that little hussy, or whatever she called her, out. And so she despised her in her eyes. Genesis chapter 16, verse 4 says. Okay? All right, so God promises this land in Genesis chapter 15 and verse number 18. In the same day that the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river of the Euphrates. I'm telling you guys, whatever Israel thinks is all theirs today, it is much, much smaller than what God actually gave. Now, I believe that in time, and possibly in the millennial kingdom, this fullness of the composite promise will be consummated and fulfilled. As of yet, it's never actually reached this original promise. It was afterwards again confirmed in Exodus chapter 23 and verse 31. God reiterates this promise hundreds of years later. Now, he's taken the Abrahamic covenant promise, he threw it past Isaac, he threw it past Jacob, he threw it past all the rest of the children in Joseph, and he threw it all the way through the book of Exodus, and he winds up with this bunch of unbelieving people that are snotting and griping and complaining, and he reiterates the land promise. He superimposes the land promise over top of the disbelief, the rebellion, and the Mosaic covenant that would eventually collapse. Now, the biggest it ever got, you can read about it in 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 3 through 14, was in David's reign and Solomon's. That's the biggest it ever got. And it still, even at that, wasn't as big as what God promised in Genesis chapter 15, verse 18. So you get this promise in chapter 15, and in chapter 16, Sarah gets an idea. And she says to him, why don't you just take my handmaid? Okay? And so Sarah dealt harshly with her. Verse number 6. Abraham said unto Sarah, behold, thy maid is in thy hands. Do whatever you want to do with her. And Sarah dealt hardly or harshly with her, and she fled away. Now, she takes this boy named Ishmael. not Isaac, Ishmael, Abram's firstborn son. And she runs away. Now, in verse number 11, the Lord shows up. The angel of the Lord said unto her in verse 10, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. Verse 12 is the character sketch of this man named Ishmael. He will be a wild child, a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand is going to be against him. He shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Okay, here's the character sketch. He's a wild man. He's against everybody. He dwells in the presence of the brethren. Okay, so Hagar bears him a son, and Abram calls the name of Hagar's son Ishmael. Okay, so he is the father of the tribes of the Arabs. Not Philistines, Arabs. Okay? Now, Abraham's 90 years old. The story jumps around here. God visits Abraham and says, you know that boy you got? Yeah, that's not him. That's your child. That's not mine. That's the child of your provision. That's the child of your production. That's the child of your intuition. That's the child of your innovation. That's not mine. That's not a child of promise. Okay? So you guys want to open up your newspaper tomorrow, you can look at what human plans build. They build chaos. They build violence. They build Hamas, which is violence. And they are a wild man, fights everybody else, and lives in the presence of their brethren. Okay? Chapter 17, Genesis 17 and 18, Abraham falls down on his face and says, how's a child going to be born to me? I'm 90 years old. My wife's 90 years old. And Abraham said unto God, oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. Okay? And the Lord says, yes, no. Yeah, I get that, but no, I'm not doing that. Verse 20, the Lord said, I'm going to make an everlasting covenant with your son, Isaac. He's not even born yet. Okay? And he says, I'm going to make this, he's coming to this promise, okay? And he's telling him, he's born in the mind of God. He's already named in the mind of God. And read verse 19 of Genesis 17. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son, indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. Now, as for this Ishmael boy, I have heard you. I will bless him, I will make him fruitful, I will multiply him. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. And he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. Now, you have this story that continues. You have this issue that comes about. And what you have is Sodom and Gomorrah and the prayers and all of this stuff. But later on in chapter 21, the Lord visits Sarah, and she does conceive. Okay? And she has this child as God had commanded. And Isaac was born. Genesis 21 and 5. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear me will laugh with me. And she said, who would have believed, or who would have said unto Abraham, that Sarah would have given children? For I have borne him a son in old age. Now, so Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking him. Now, when you get into rabbinic commentary, some of them say that he did something to him. He tried to kill him. Others say he tried to do a lewd act against him. It's more than just ha, 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 he's pointing and laughing. Whatever, I'm not going to get into the rabbinic meaning, but the mocking was that she was laughing, joy was in the house, and he was trying to do something to the child to turn her laughter into tears, into weeping. He wanted to rob her of her joy. Okay? So the rabbinic commentary, don't read this in just the King James Version and assume, oh, he's just over there chuckling. Okay? I don't know if he tried to kill the child. I don't know if he tried to molest the child, but it's definitely more stern in the text than it is in the English text. He did more than just try to mock him or laugh at him. And so she says unto him, cast out this bondwoman and her kid, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son. And the thing was grievous to Abraham's sight because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, because of the bondwoman, in all that Sarah hath said unto thee. Hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. Abraham rises up early. He takes a bottle of water and provision, and he gives it. Okay? Now, let's get to the brass tacks of this, okay? This is Arabs and Jews fighting are not a Philistinian issue. And technically, folks, let's get down to the truth of this. It's not Judaism against Islamic religion. That wasn't even, this is two children of Abraham clawing each other's face off. And the wild man is still mocking. And the wild man is still pressing. Okay? Now, Ishmael is wild, meaning without boundaries. Wild just doesn't mean, he's got unkempt hair, and I hear people preach about it, he's a wild man. He's got like grit between his teeth, and spittle and in his beard, and he's kind of wild like John the Baptist. No, that's not what it was. It meant he doesn't live in the confines of set boundaries, both spiritually, psychologically, and nationally. He's a great nation, but he lives in the presence of all of his brethren. He doesn't have an abode of his own, okay? So you got to get deeper into this story of who is Abraham, what did he represent in this land of Canaan. You got to get into the story of Ishmael. What was his representation? And then Isaac, what did he mean? So deeper into this story, Abraham represented limits, boundaries, kindness, equity. You can just go on down the list. Equitability. The way he was equitable with people, the way he had a reputation with Pharaoh, the way that he dealt with people, even with Sodom, even with Lot. He was a man that was principled. He was a man that wanted to find peace. He was so peaceful that he took his wife and said, listen, let's not start a war over your beauty. And he tried to come up with this plan. It was ill-conceived and it was ill-lamented. And I get all that, okay? I'm not justifying any of that. But the truth of the matter is, he was a man that was seeking a way forward. He was seeking the ability to negotiate. Ishmael, on the other hand, has no boundaries. He is the antithesis to boundaries. Okay, he's wild, he's unruly, he's undisciplined, he's uncommitted. He has no regard for the sense of presence of joy. He has no respect for decorum. He has, you're at this place where Sarah and her son are, and he does something to violate the innocent. Like, why not take it out on Abram? Why not take it out on Sarah? Why not avenge your mother's honor against the woman who did the injustice? Why take it out on the innocent, right? But this is the spirit of that world, of that people, of that concept, is to fight against the other. Instead of walking away and say, we have enough, we're blessed, we understand this. They will fight it, they will war, and they will do. So if you're reading Sigmund Freud, which is not recommended, but it's still in our culture, the Freudian concept is ego becomes superego here. An inflated, untamed id. Okay? If you're reading Richard Dawkins, this is like the personification and the living out of the selfish gene. I'm going to get mine. I'm going to get what I want. I'm going to violate no matter what. So Ishmael used the kindness of Abraham and abused it. Whatever he got, he abused it. If they show him kindness, right? They let him back in. He doesn't think, well, my goodness, I'm thankful to have my part. No, he takes good and he turns it to evil. He takes this Abrahamic kindness, like Abram's arguing with God over this boy. This boy, people are like, well, he was treated bad and he was castigated and isolated and there was insinuation in his life, and not really, not in the text. Hagar was jealous, or Sarah was jealous of Hagar, and Ishmael was allowed to cohabitate because of the kindness and the generosity of his father. Come on now, think about this. Abraham argues with God, trying to force feed God this boy. And God is saying, no, I'm not having it. So this kid has kindness showed to him. But what does he do with the kindness? No good deed goes unpunished with Ishmael. He takes any good he gets and he uses it, okay, so here's a perfect analogy. Water. Water's good. Water's kind. Water's life. Okay? But what is water? What is water without boundaries? Well, it can drown somebody. And what is water without limits? Well, it's a flood. You can flood someone's crops. You can destroy their livelihood, because you can take something that's good and abuse it. That was the persona. That was the character sketch of who Ishmael was. And that's what we're living in today is billions of dollars have been given to these people. And you got 3 terrorist leaders of Hamas that are living like kings. What do they do with the money that you give them to put water in Gaza? Well, they tear it up and build bombs with it. But let's get down to the real root, okay? This is not a war about geography. This is not a contest about geography. This is not even a war about land. It's a war about who controls it. It's about boundaries and wildness and kindness and violence. And is there wrong on both sides? Yes. Is it lamentable on both sides? Absolutely. Anytime there's death of the innocent, it is lamentable. But I'm telling you, at the end of the day, get down to what this is. This is a war between Ishmael and between Isaac. And God said, there's an everlasting covenant that I have given Abraham that land. And so, do I think that all of Israel and anyone who holds Israeli citizenship, do I think they are the inheritors? No. Hear me. I don't think that. Come on and talk to me about it. I don't think that everyone who lives in Tel Aviv, one of the most secular cities in the world, one of the places where there is more homosexuality and more liberalism, then it's not Hasidic Jews that live in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is a wildly liberal city. In fact, I think it's the most liberal city in all of the Middle East. I don't know that. So do I think that everybody who lives in Israel is these Abrahamic people that God? No, I actually don't. Do I think that everybody in Israel is God's chosen people? No, I actually don't. So what do I think about modern day Israel? Well, number one, there has always been a remnant. Okay, there's always been a group of people that God has reserved so he could say, the rest of you, I'm going to sell out to Babylon. The rest of you, I'm going to punish with Persian invasion. The rest of you, I'm going to punish with Roman overlords. But I'm going to keep this little group, whoever they are, wherever they are, whatever sect, whatever party, whatever, I don't know what they are. I don't have a clue who they are. But I believe that somewhere in all of that modern, all of that secular Israel, I believe there's a few that God has said, here's a little remnant. They're not the church. They're not my bride. But at least I can look back through history and say, the remnant still has the land. I have never let Abraham down. I'm still promising what I gave him. It's still a covenant. I've sent them into slavery. I've sent them into bondage. I've punished them, but there's a remnant that remains. And so what will happen is in the eschatological end time, God will go in to Israel and he will send two prophets. They will preach and there will be people converted to Jesus Christ that are Jews. The angel will go back and forth in the sky, trumpeting, preaching, do not take the mark. If you take the mark, here's what's going to happen. And people will be converted by that. And people will be converted by the two witnesses that are killed, lie dead in the street 3 days while they party, and they'll stand back up, and that will cause a revival to break out. Okay? And then the rest of them, whoever's not baptized, whoever's not in Christ, whoever's not in the gospel, they're going to be punished at the end of the eschatological time period in which we're speaking. Okay? The remnant that actually inherits the millennial kingdom or the new heaven and the new earth, that group of people will be converted Jews. So somebody said, well, you mean to tell me that non-converted Jews are going to get into the kingdom? No. Verily, verily, except a man be born of the water and spirit, he shall no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. No, he can't get in. But there is some kind of little group, remnant, out of the main, out of the whole, that God is going to reach into. And when those Jews see him, Zechariah says, Isaiah, they're going to see his hands pierced. Where did you get these wounds? I got these in the house of my friends. So the Palestinian covenant, the land of Palestine, which is not a biblical concept, although it is, I mean, it's the land of the Bible, but the Romans renamed it that, okay, as a kind of poke in the eye about, it being Israel, the nation of Israel. They were subduing it. And so what you have is Israel, which there is a remnant somewhere today, okay, that will inherit the land. But that remnant will also inherit this revelatory moment where they say, where did you get these wounds? I was wounded in the house of my brethren. And they will be converted, and by the time they inherit what they're going to inherit, and by the time they possess it, they will indeed be converted Jews. Now, this other group is the Ishmaelites, or the father of the Arabs. Are they cursed? No. He said, I will bless them. I will multiply them. My goodness, they're some of the richest countries on planet Earth. But what are they doing? They are fighting in their wildness. They are fighting in their lack of boundaries. And they are fighting in their abuse of all kindnesses. This is not a war between Palestinians and Israel. This is a war between Ishmael and Isaac.